All right, welcome to the program. This is the Other People Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth interviews with today's leading writers. My name is Brad Listi, and I'm your host. I'm here in Los Angeles. It's great to be with you. I appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram. My guest today is Jess Walter, author of a new novel called So Far Gone, available from Harper Books. So Far Gone is the official June pick of the Otherppl Book Club. That's my book club. You can sign up for my book club over at the show's official website, otherppl.com. Get a new book delivered to your door every 30 days. I interview book club authors here on the podcast. I have an email newsletter. I would love it if you would sign up over at bradlisti.substack.com. It's a great way to keep up with the show. I will let you know about the latest episodes, and I also share a list of links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. If that sounds good, sign up for my newsletter, bradlisti.substack.com. I also want to give a quick plug to my new company. It is called Deep Dive. It will be launching soon. Deep Dive specializes in the creation of educational audio. The debut course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel. I'm the host. It features more than 50 hours of instruction from dozens of today's leading writers. This is never-before-heard material, and it is in-depth. It is comprehensive. It's unlike any writing course out there. Some of the instructors include Emily St. John Mandel, Steve Almond, Vivi Ganeshananthan, Purchista Hakpur, Matt Bell, Matthew Salisis, Antoine Wilson, Hannah Petard, Lynn Steger-Strong, Madeline Lucas, Deb Olin Unferth, Melissa Broder. The list goes on. It's really cool. It's coming soon. We're in the final phases, trying to get the app all ready to go. And once that app is done and it's in the app stores, then we're going to launch, and you're going to get to hear what I've been talking about. Again, the debut course is called How to Write a Novel. The company is called Deep Dive. If you want to join the wait list, you can do that over at the website, www.deepdive.audio, and you can follow Deep Dive on Instagram and Blue Sky. So my guest once again is Jess Walter. His new novel is called So Far Gone, available from Harper Books, the official June pick of my book club. Jess Walter is the author of 7 previous novels, including the bestsellers The Cold Millions and Beautiful Ruins, The Zero, which was a National Book Award finalist, and Citizen Vince, which won the Edgar Award for Best Novel. Jess Walter's short fiction, collected in The Angel of Rome and We Live in Water, has won the O. Henry Prize, the Pushcart Prize, and has appeared 3 times in Best American Short Stories. He lives in his hometown of Spokane, Washington, and I'm very happy to be welcoming him back onto this show for the second time. It's been a lot of years, I think more than a dozen years since I spoke with Jess Walter. Very pleased to have him here on the program and to be featuring his new novel in the book club. So let's get to the talk right now. Here I am with Jess Walter, and his new novel, one more time, is called So Far Gone.
You know that process where you have to write jacket copy and you're sort of straining with your editor? I wish I'd thought of the phrase, all the shit that's going on. You know? Because, a novel is a terrible place to break news. So it's not like, in writing about this sort of fissure in our society and the especially the decline of rational thought and of these conspiracy theories blowing up. It's not as if I was going to be telling anyone anything they didn't know. But in 2023 and 2024, I was working on a very different book. And as often happens for me, there are these sort of big motherships, like Beautiful Ruins, that I work on for 12, 15 years. And then these little ships sort of fly out. And that's sort of what happened with this book. I could not stop checking the news and looking at my phone. And I saw a New Yorker cartoon that was a car on a highway driving toward a big sign that said "Can't look away," and then this off ramp that just said "Had enough." And I had sort of reached the had enough point, and I did what I often do with writing, often with short stories. I'll start with a kind of thought experiment. And I thought it almost started with that Rip Van Winkle idea. What if someone had been so fed up with Trump's election and the general state of America in 2016 that they went off the grid and just shut themselves off from the world, thinking, I'll come out in 2024 when it's all over, and that's the latest that it could go. And instead you come out and you find out not only is it not over, but we've descended to this place where, where it was worse than you thought. And so really that was kind of the first impulse. And yeah, I'm a writer who likes both, to embrace the comic and the absurd elements of things. And so I knew it would head in that direction. I'd just come off a Charles Portis kick. And so I decided it would be a road trip novel, like Dog of the South. And really it was all those elements kind of coming together. And then I wanted it to be fast and propulsive. And so I sort of wrote it in that vein. And, there was a moment right before the 2024 election as I was finishing it when I thought, I hope at the end, when I'm finished with this, it feels like historical fiction. Like, remember when we were concerned about militias and violence and the political divide that has torn families apart. And then, with a kind of dread, I realized, no, I think it's going to be pretty relevant contemporary fiction.
Yeah. Yeah. And you say like that your short stories often begin with a thought experiment. When you began this, were you thinking like this is going to be a novel, or were you thinking that it was shorter form and then it sort of grew?
I sort of knew it would be a novel, again, because of that propulsive side. But if I had a book for every novel I've started that doesn't follow through, I would have 14, I would probably have 20 times as many books on my shelf. So often I'll start something and it peters out, or it doesn't, form itself in some way. Sometimes it does become a short story. With this one, though, the main character is a guy named Rhys Kinnick, and I gave him several external qualities that I share with him. He's a former journalist like I was. I even sent him to the very land that my family owns that I lived on as a kid, and the cinder block house that I lived in. So I would drive up there and just sort of soak up, what it would be like to live up there. And so I invested enough into it early on that I figured it would be a novel. And then, as often happens with novels, the politics falls away and it becomes the personal. It becomes about those characters and those people and the situations you put them in. And that's the moment when you know, oh yeah, this is a novel. This is not a didactic work of political, fiction hiding itself as a novel. This is a novel about people who in many ways are trying to find their way back, their own redemption from the mistakes they've made and the creases that they've fallen into.
Yeah, that's well said. And I think we should, for listeners who have not yet had a chance to read, I just want to kind of give the setup. You mentioned Rhys Kinnick. He's a former journalist. He's in his 60s, I believe. I don't know if his age is ever specified, but
he's a little older than me. So early 60s is sort of what I imagine. Yeah.
And he's gone off the grid, I think, for a variety of reasons, but maybe the most like acute reason is that he punched his son-in-law at Thanksgiving dinner. Yeah. Maybe that was like the breaking point, or, one of the breaking points. And he finally just said, to hell with it. And he goes and lives on this land that's been in his family in this cinder block house. And he's kind of maybe fancying himself like a modern day Thoreau. He is divorced and he has a daughter named Bethany. And Bethany has two children named Leah and Asher. I got that right, right?
You did, yeah.
And Bethany has married a couple of guys whom Rhys is not necessarily like a huge fan of.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. But, you mentioned people trying to sort of find their way back from the mistakes that they've made. And so Rhys, as a father and a husband, and maybe to some lesser extent as a professional human, though it's not necessarily his fault. I feel like to be a journalist in this era is just tough, no matter how good you are. And he's trying to kind of find his way back from that and from this self-imposed isolation and disconnection from his family and from his grandchildren. And then you have Bethany, who has been unlucky in love, but has also maybe made some poor choices. Her first husband was Sluggish Doug?
Yeah. She's Reese begins the book by decrying her taste in men. So she's gone from Sluggish Doug, who plays in an electronica band, to Shithead Shane, who she met after trying to kick a mild drug habit in an NA meeting. And so, yeah, those are. And Shithead Shane is his original foil. And I wanted to take that heightened experience that I think people have had at Thanksgivings and at family gatherings. I don't think politics and the culture have come between families like this probably since the late 1960s, when the generation gap caused parents and children to see the world so differently. And we really have this reality gap now where people on the left and the right of the political spectrum are just getting entirely different sets of information and are, because of that, choosing entirely different paths to their belief systems.
So Shithead Shane and Bethany meet in a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. Both are trying to kind of kick a habit, and as often happens in these situations, they're also finding their way to some sort of spiritual understanding, and it gets like really Jesus-y? Is that a way to put it?
Yeah, originally it's kind of traditional, straightforward, but Shane as he's creating the book, is one of those characters, one of those people who needs it needs to get more intense and deeper all the time. So originally they're going to a big box traditional new agey church. They call it a Godsco because it's just this big box church that they go to. But he keeps going further and further AM radio into sort of literalist evangelical Christianity, until pretty soon he finds his way into some of those backwater places where the conspiracy theories live, where Christian nationalism sort of gets its root and sometimes falls over into really radical right-wing thought. And I don't, Shane feels like someone who almost repeats everything he hears and gets it wrong about half the time. He's convinced the NFL is part of a grand conspiracy. And that's the thing that really sparks the fight between Reese and his son-in-law on Thanksgiving, as they're watching an NFL game, and he leans over and tells Reese that the refs are in on it, that the NFL is rigged. And his evidence is pretty comic, but it was a way to start the novel and to create this character that at first might seem like a straw man, Shane. But I think one of the great joys for me in the novel was realizing how similar he and Reese are. I mean, look at what Reese does. He punches his son-in-law and he goes out into the woods and hides, commits an act of violence, and then moves off the grid, which is a very radical right-wing thing to do when you think about it. Give up on the world because it's disappointed you so completely. And so that's always one of the joys of writing fiction, is discovering within your characters almost mirror images of each other.
I got to say, as much as it's a right-wing thing to do, it's also, I think, a fantasy. Like for me, it was like, this idea of just saying, fuck it, I'm going to go live in the woods. Yeah. That has occurred to me more than once. I got to say.
I think most of us, maybe after the election, maybe at different times, we have gone into sort of the metaphoric woods, in our minds, we've said, I can't look at it anymore. I have to turn away. And that's where the thought experiment led me. I went to visit a friend who lives off the grid, who does it the right way. I mean, he and his wife don't even produce any garbage. Every bit of food that comes into their house, they consume. All organic stuff. They solar panels to heat the house and to start their electric car. And they have almost no imprint on the world. Incredible work that they've put into to do this. And I went out and I visited and I said, now, how do you think I would do it? And he laughed. And, we imagined these boat batteries sitting around in a compost toilet that I was never able to put together. So that larger thought experiment of, could you turn away? Could you, as you said, just turn away from it all and go live off the grid somewhere and wait until it's over. And for me, I realized I don't have to go march. I don't have to donate money to campaigns, but I can't turn away. Turning away to me is a kind of surrender to nihilism almost. And so that was sort of the course the novel took for me, was starting with this extreme event and in a comic way, following this journey all the way to the idea that Reese can't, if he turns away from the world, he turns away from his people, from his family, from his community, from kind of his responsibilities. And so that for me, that was sort of the journey of following that wish fulfillment all the way to its end.
Well, he's a great comic character. And that's one of the things that you do so well in your work, and in particular in this novel, because like we've been saying, like we're operating from a darkness.
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of the foundation from which this story springs. And yet it's a very funny novel. And Reese is for all of his flaws, he's a very winning character, at least through my eyes. Like I loved following. He's got a lot of great lines. And, I think that his lens on the world, I feel simpatico with, and yet I hear what you're saying, like to completely turn away from everything, to disconnect from family, and to just sort of say, fuck it, and not really even pay attention to what's going on. That can't be the answer. Like, right. And I think that's the tension that you're trying to sort of resolve.
Yeah. The whole time I was thinking, where do I launch the story? Where do we come in? And the first thing I envisioned was, this guy living in the woods for years, with some real hygiene issues, beard. And I have an old picture of myself from the middle of the pandemic that I sort of drew on, when I was probably at my most feral. And the first thing I imagined was, this knock on his remote door, and he opens the door, and through the screen, he can't quite see who it is. So he asks these two kids, magazines or chocolate bars, what are you selling? What do you find young capitalists selling? And the little boy says, we're not selling anything. We're your grandchildren. And that moment, I wanted to shock him out of his malaise and his patterns in that very moment, and realizing that he doesn't recognize his own grandchildren. It's been 3 years since he's seen them. I needed to shake him up from that very first moment. And as a writer, you're always looking. You use the phrase inflection point. You're always looking for that point of transition to where a character is driven to action. And one way to make the novel propulsive for me was to make the very first scene, that transition, that scene where he goes from a passive hiding character to someone who now has instant motivation. His grandchildren have shown up on his front porch. His daughter is missing. His 13-year-old granddaughter is betrothed to the 19-year-old son of the pastor. And immediately the results and effects of his reclusivity are right there in front of him. And it's always a challenge to start, sort of that quickly, and then of course to backtrack and explain how he got there. But it really, for me, it set the stakes so quickly that I felt like I was in the book right away.
And in terms of navigating the tension between the darkness and the comedy, this can be a little bit tricky when the darkness is really dark, and it's something that's somewhat topical, contemporary and real. You can screw that up, I think, if you get too goofy.
Right.
And yet, if it's all, if you go the other direction and it's like too dark, then you can alienate readers or just make people throw the book across the room because it's too much.
Right.
So can you just talk, because you do a great job of sort of walking that tightrope. Is that just intuitive? Are there processes that you take a text through to try to make sure that you're striking a good balance?
I don't know if it's entirely intuitive, but I don't think it's something you can plan out, if that makes sense. It is very much a feel thing, and you trust sort of your own feeling. And it isn't something you can fake either. I don't think there's, really, I don't write comic fiction out of a desire to make people laugh or to string some jokes together. I write it because it's the philosophical way that I view the world, starting with the hubris and punctured vanities of all of us, and the realization that even this dark period will pass, and we will look back on it, and we will remember many things, some of them horrible, but many of them just absurd and laughable, that humans can get so twisted around and so far behind. I'm accident prone. I've broken, I think I might be nearing Evel Knievel's record for broken bones. And when you walk through life viewing it as a pattern of accidents, in fact, Rhys Kinnick breaks his cheek, his zygomatic arch, which happened to me in a basketball game a few years ago. I broke my cheekbone in two different places. And so giving him one of my ailments was, and it was a way to, to kind of create this character that I identified with. I got a stick in my left eye when I was 5, and it's just really been a steady stream of accidents along the way. And maybe because I grew up in a family where the only crime was self-pity, I learned to laugh at every painful event in my life, and to find the humor in them. Again, the philosophical humor, the idea that, that in our short time on the planet, we bumble and stumble and do our best. But I also think at heart, I am an old-fashioned humanist, and I believe in the power of people who have good intentions to find their way there. And so maybe that balance you're talking about, that comes in wedding those two things in a novel. Characters that I really come to care about, that I really think want better for themselves and their people, and then laid over a worldview that thinks that there's almost nothing in humankind that doesn't deserve the gift of humor attached to it.
Well, you're also really great at drawing characters with whom I would suspect you disagree strongly. Like when you get over to the Shane side of the ledger, it's not a caricature. You do a good job of kind of rounding out those characters. And I can imagine as a creative exercise, like part of the impulse for you was maybe wanting to explore like the spectrum, not just like the grumpy, like misanthropic Rhys Kinnick, but all the people in the book.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the title, So Far Gone, is can describe America, can describe any of the characters. Is Rhys so far gone that he can't come back? His granddaughter, so Rhys's daughter, describes him to her mother as being so far gone once he's up in the woods, and her daughter Leah hears that as he's gone so far, but he might come back, but I heard that title as both a statement and a question. And each chapter begins with a character. So the first one is What Happened to Kinnick, which also is a statement and a question. What happened to Kinnick? How did he get to this point? And we sort of explicate that in the first chapter. And as each chapter went along, I found myself asking the question and making the statement. Here's what happened to Kinnick, and also here we explain how he got like this. And I sort of knew I was writing toward a character who in the beginning felt the furthest from me, and that's Shane, Rhys's family foil. But I also knew that as happens when you write fiction and you open these characters up and you start imagining, no human being, or very few maybe, wakes up in the morning twirling their evil mustache thinking how they're going to go about making life miserable for people. Most of us have justification in our minds for the things we do. And imagining Shane's justification, imagining what it was that motivated him, and realizing it was fear. He is as afraid of the world as I am at this point, but for the exact opposite reasons, and that fear connected him to Rhys in a way, made them both want to turn their backs on the state of the world in very different ways. Rhys by going off and hiding in this place, Shane by joining a church and a militia that he thought might offer protection for his family in the end days, should they come about as he feared they would. And that that realization also made me realize what in the end would connect these two characters. And it's the question we ask probably as Americans, if I could get so large, what's going to bring us all back together? What do we care about enough that instead of identifying each other immediately by you're red, I'm blue, you're liberal, I'm conservative, you're MAGA, I'm a socialist, whatever labels, what things will bring us together in a common way again? And once I realized I was writing towards Shane's point of view, I realized I was also asking that question.
Do you have any answers?
I mean, for them, it's family, they're, Reese endures a lot of pain and a lot of those comic and but really physical traumas to try to get his family back, and it's the same thing that's motivating Shane in the end of the book. And without giving too much away, I wanted I wanted the violence to be real, as comic as the novel is, and that balance won't work for everyone, I know. But the reactions I've gotten from the book so far are that people, I think, get the same sort of sense of catharsis. First of all, from Reese's early rants about this, about where this is all headed. But I think a second catharsis is hopefully coming. It certainly came for me in the writing. And this is my 30th year in publishing, my 11th book. And if there's anything that as a younger writer I doubted or didn't realize, it was that the experience I have writing the book is often recreated for the majority of readers. And so if I trust the experience I'm having writing the book, which is this sort of what begins as a kind of, yes, this character is voicing the frustrations I feel, and then leads to, I think for me, it led to a second moment when I realized at some point we're going to have to put this all back together again. And it's never too early to start looking for that path to kind of reconciliation with our neighbors and those people that we simply don't agree with.
Yeah, I struggle with this.
It's a struggle. Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I'm fine to reconcile with people who are on board with what's happening now, as long as they say, oof, I got it wrong. I'm really sorry. Yeah. If they just want me to somehow be like, oh, it's okay. Like, even family members, I'm like, I don't know if I can go there. Like, it's just too infuriating to me. Yeah. I don't know how you feel, but it's like, I don't know what to do about it. Like, I think there's so many of us who are like, how are we going to put this back together? I guess that's the whole point of your book.
Yeah. And I don't have the answer. I mean, I'm a fiction writer, grappling with those same things. But I do think I think one of the really dangerous things in talking as a fiction writer is that we've gotten to a point where we can't imagine those sets of beliefs. We can't. And so you ask about writing that character. I would have considered it a failure to not be able to at least open that character up. And he doesn't represent radical right-wing thought. He doesn't represent Christian nationalism. He's just a character, but he's a character that I felt like I did find access in, I did find purchase in. I still don't agree with him that somehow the NFL is engaged in a giant conspiracy against the teams he happens to like, and in many of his other beliefs. But understanding how he got there felt to me like the work of fiction. And again, it is way too soon to imagine that we're gonna heal these rifts that divide the country. But having written the novel before this was set in 1909, when America almost devolved into a class war, and watching the way in which those issues rose to the fore and then kind of fell back, and often it's some larger world event that brings people together. I honestly thought January 6th had done that in the moment. I thought, oh, good. At this point, the Republican Party can no longer cling to, to this kind of thinking. And of course, that didn't happen. And so wondering what nationally it is, often it takes a crisis. It takes the Great Depression or World War I or World War II. I really hope that isn't what it takes to bring people back together again. And for me, one of the reasons I wanted to make Reese a journalist was I feel like one of the big causes of this reality gap that we live in now is the fact that we have, that so many institutions have been eroded. Trust in government, trust in media. Imagine 20 years ago, I would have told you that people don't trust libraries, that there are people who going in trying to pull books out of libraries or schools, these things that used to sort of have broad community trust. It's been dismantled in so many different ways, in a really destructive way. And what's jumped in the middle, and the media is the one that I probably am the closest to because I was a former journalist. And now more than half of people say they get their news, quote unquote, from social media. And what they're really getting, of course, is just a reinforcement of what they already believe: conspiracy theories, memes, misinformation. Into that vacuum, what else can come except those things? And so I do imagine that at some point, a return to a common reality is possible. I really think it is. I think, I think, again, maybe it's my optimistic outlook, but I think it'll be sooner rather than later. I do think we're at sort of an inflection point, and I do think we're at a turning point that I think we'll have better days after it. Now, how long that lasts? Is it months? Is it weeks? Is it a year? I don't know. But in the longer term, I really do feel like this won't last as long as we fear.
Yeah, I mean, the media environment and the social media environment, the algorithmic environment that we're existing in right now is just unsustainable. And I have friends who I have noticed very discernible turns in ways that are disturbing. Like their worldview, the things that they fixate on, like as a pretty obsessive, might be too strong of a word, but not by much. Like I'm a pretty obsessive observer of news media and social media. And I feel like a fairly decent sense of the way the algorithms work. Like it's gotten to the point where like I could be talking to somebody for a few minutes and can usually discern with fairly good accuracy, like what algorithm they're in.
Right.
Like you can kind of feel it. And it could be somebody who's like, okay, this is somebody who's a democratic socialist and, it's very simple. Or it could be somebody who is at the other end of things. And I have friends who are talking with me and saying crazy things, at least from my perspective. Yeah. And it feels way far removed from who I knew them to be. Yeah. And it's very troubling. And it's like, wow, what is going on in especially I think our internet social media environment? How much intentionality is behind these algorithms and what these people are being fed? It almost feels like people are being brainwashed.
There's a great book called Stolen Focus that talks about what this internet, smartphone, social media era has done to our attention spans, to our ability to process news and to make these decisions. And one of the most fascinating things I found out was back in the early utopian days of all this technology, they thought, oh, when you sign on, we'll give you all the things you love. You love kittens? We're going to give you kittens. Your Instagram feed is going to be full of kittens doing cute things. And we'll give you some news. We'll give you what you love. And then they realized, oh, we react to the things we love, but we react even more to the anxiety. And so it was, all of these tech companies, it really was partially intentional. And it's not that they want you to be anxious. It's they want you to stay on board. And one of the most telling examples from that book was a former engineer at Facebook who early on, when Facebook was, had taken over and was the dominant social media, said hey, we know where your friends are. Why don't we have a little map that tells you, here's how many of your friends are within a 2-block radius, sort of like the dating apps work, but he heard back from his bosses, oh no, we don't want them to encounter their friends in real life. We want their friendships to be on the app. And so intentionally not telling you that your best friend is next door. Again, it's not that they don't want you to have a best friend. It's that they don't ever want you to leave the thing. And most of us know when we get that little bong on Sunday afternoon and it says that you're spending 6 hours and 12 minutes a day on your phone or however long. Most of us know just how successful they've been. And part of it is mixing the kittens in with the marching protesters and the crashing planes and the video of car chases that end with someone being splattered on the road. The prurient alongside the terrifying, this is what you're being fed. And it's no wonder that we all live in a state of heightened anxiety with the person on the other side, the person whose beliefs we don't share, the cause of that, because we are being fed it by a system that was set up to feed us what we fear alongside, what makes us go awe. And the fact that the fearful stuff is more effective is a terrifying discovery that these companies made.
That's in their their financial best interest to keep you agitated and keep you on the platform. And I think it needs to be regulated. I mean, right? It's like that's the answer. Like these algorithms need to be regulated and people need to be protected, and there's got to be some guardrails.
Well, and the interesting thing is we blame ourselves. We say, gosh, I have got to be better about this. I've got to be better about this. This is akin to what the tobacco companies did. It is addictive. It is mental nicotine that we are bringing in all the time. If someone at any moment might put something on Instagram that's nice about me, and alongside that, I'm going to see all the things that will keep me staring at it for however much time passes. So for me, reading that book was like, I have been a reader since I was a kid, and I noticed that my reading was getting harder. I wasn't finishing as many novels. I was getting impatient. And reading this book and reading other books like it and other research it was almost as if I was coming across a medical condition that I hadn't been diagnosed with yet, but I had those symptoms. Oh, that's happening to me. That's happening to me. And so for me, it was the simple thing of getting my phone time back down under an hour. Can I do that? Can I not have my phone next to the bed, but have the novel that I'm reading? And that restoration of my own attention span also began restoring my peace of mind. I became less frantic maybe about those things. Now, this is the metaphoric woods I was talking about that I went into. I'm not going to look at the news. I'm not going to look at these things. And I think it was a healthy step in the first part of this, which is the way technology has affected us. But then the next part was, again, my family, my friends, the world I want my kids to grow up in. And so another balance that I'm trying to strike is to be involved without being overwhelmed, to venture back in the world and help affect the positive change that I want to see. And especially to affect, for me, as a former journalist, once again, trying to bring to the people that I know who have fallen for some of this stuff, reality, science, empiricism, all the things that I think help us make better decisions and help us, find our way back toward public policies that have kindness and decency and, and reasonableness at their heart. And so again, it's just these tiny, small steps, but coming back out of the woods without being enslaved by what Rhys Kinnick in the novel calls a tiny bartender that's been put in his pocket, as he tries to drink less, he's got this tiny bartender that at any time will serve him up, this cocktail of anxiety and dread that is part of what drove him into the woods in the first place.
I mean, yeah, I'll catch myself scrolling sometimes, and it's just like you say, it'll be like sports highlight, plane crash, animal attack, base jump, like somebody base jumping, you're just like, and I'll stop and realize what I'm doing, and I'll just go, my God, and like my heart rate is up, and I'm like feeling like I've got some cortisol flowing, and it's just, it's insidious. It's insidious.
It's insidious. And I think and again, the person on the opposite side of the political spectrum of you is getting the exact same treatment, but he is seeing that in schools they have kitty litter boxes, and that pedophiles are waiting in the mixed use bathroom to jump you at any time, and that somebody peed on an American flag, and that they're getting a constant feed of the things that drive their blood pressure up, while we're seeing protesters sprayed with tear gas for trying to keep a refugee from being deported. And again, how do you exist in a world where you don't turn away from these things, but act in a way that is helpful without being overwhelmed by it? And that's where the thought experiment led me, and again, for me, keeping my sense of humor is so important, being able to laugh at the absurdity of, what I've seen described as clown car fascism, and that's a personal choice. Maybe not everyone needs to be able to continue to laugh at the absurdity of things. I do. And especially the absurdity of myself. And so, Reese is very much one of those self-deprecating, stumbling characters that I tend to write, because I tend to identify with them.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I mean, if you can't find humor, like if you can't laugh in the darkness, like it just feels like it's going to be extra miserable needlessly. Like you got to.
And I think as a writer, going back to Candide, going back to Cervantes, the urge to hold up human nature and the folly that we all fall into is, I think that even literature that we necessarily wouldn't think of as comic, I think always has that sort of strain of being able to see through the hubris and the arrogance that leads humanity into these cul-de-sacs that we find ourselves in. And we're in one now, there's no doubt, but yeah, that's for me always the path to both the fiction that I tend to love and the fiction that I write.
Yeah, something I'm struggling with is like we talk about like the insidiousness of the algorithms and the media environment that, feels like it's not bifurcated, but it's like everybody's kind of in their own little silo, and they're getting fed this kind of specialized content that reinforces biases and agitates them and all the rest. And yet there is a part of me that's like, okay, but at what point this doesn't absolve people? Like there are lots of smart, educated people that I know who seem to have fallen for the fascist appeal. Just because they're getting bad information on Facebook, I'm supposed to absolve them? Like they're smart enough to figure this out. Like that's what I go through in my head. I'm like, how can you be buying this? Yeah. Like what darkness lives in you that this is appealing to?
And I want to be really clear. I am not arguing equivalence. I mean, the misinformation that comes out on the left is nowhere near as prevalent as the misinformation that comes out on the right. But in both cases, it is causing people to form those kinds of opinions. I like the way Reese puts it. His theory is that these three unbeatable asshole constituencies came together: the greedy, the stupid, and the paranoid. And I have hope for some of those. I mean, I do think, given the right information, that number that maybe supports some of these policies that are inhumane, I think given the proper information, many of those people shake loose. I think seeing the effect that this is going to have on the United States, I think many of those people, will shake loose of at least those kinds of beliefs. And I think there's a centrist desire, for a peaceful, reasonable world in which, vaccine deniers are not in charge of health in the country. And, so there's clearly been an overreach. And typically what happens then is it swings back. How long the overreach lasts, what happens, and we all fear sort of the death of democracy, and we see these small bits of it happening. But we're a ways from, I think, losing the power of a large group of people to change the direction of the country. And if we have lost that, I'll go down with the ship, because we will fight, I think, for that very system. And it could be that we end up having to do that. But in the meantime, I have really tried to deal differently with the individuals in my life. I have a good friend from elementary school who was a flat earther, and we were science buddies in school. And one of the things I'm going to do when I get back from book tour is just send him a note, go to coffee. And if I can, we all start in our own small way, but if I can convince one person that the world is round, then I will have done my duty for the day,
Yeah, it's like, you got to offer people grace. I think we need to keep talking. I got to say, it gets hard sometimes. Like I feel like there are violations happening now that are so morally offensive to me that even to friends of mine, I'm like, if you're on board with this, or you're even passive in the face of it, I don't know I can't square that. Like, I'm struggling so hard because I don't want to cut people off, but I'm also like, I've got to have a line. If I don't have a line, then who am I? So it's really troubling. And
I guess the question is, what does that line consist of? Again, there are conversations that are impossible to have with people. And it's funny because I have heard from some readers like, oh, I don't want to go anywhere near politics right now, because it's just everywhere. It's in my life. But as a fiction writer, that makes it for me almost impossible to ignore. I can't really imagine writing about the year 2025 without that entering our lives. It is, it would be like writing a book set in Honolulu in 1941 and not mentioning that, the Japanese attacked, just a story of, two people finding love in Hawaii in in December of 1941. It just feels like such a powerful and omnipresent thing in our lives, this divide that we live over right now.
Well, I can't talk about your novel without also getting into its setting and to, this place that you're from, which is so inextricable, not just from this book, but from other books that you've written. And you feel very much identified with Spokane and with, the land there and the people there. And I think that your proximity maybe to, I guess maybe like a wider swath of the political spectrum or different kinds of people. I'm thinking of it in comparison to my life here in Los Angeles, which can be, it's got its own complexities, but it's just maybe more bubbled. Like you're in maybe closer contact with the kinds of like the Shanes of the world, guy who might be a militia in a militia or a flat earther. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, does that inform your perspective in ways that you feel like really filtered into the book?
Yeah, definitely. My very first book 30 years ago was about Ruby Ridge, a shootout in North Idaho between and it was a nonfiction book I covered as a reporter. My newspaper and we were finalists for a Pulitzer Prize. And so that was sort of my first introduction to the radical right. It was a standoff, an 11-day standoff between a white separatist family and the FBI. alcohol, tobacco, and firearms and marshal service. 3 people were killed. And it really fueled the radical right in this country. It fueled a lot of anti-government sentiment, and among politicians too. And so Reagan had started, dismantling our trust in government by saying they're inefficient. They do things terribly. Let's let private sector do these things. And that, but now it was government will kill you. Government's after you. And so having covered that and seen the signs and the rhetoric after that, and then if someone would have told me 30 years that the sorts of conspiracy theories and everything that I encountered there would then become the mainstream, I would have thought, how? But it's happened. There's a moment in the book where Reese Kinnick says to his old girlfriend, who's an editor who covers the radical right now, and she says, "Well, the government reporter." It's that's how much in the mainstream it is. And so part of it is that regional thing. Spokane is just across the Idaho border from the old Aryan Nations Church, which is another thing that I covered, which was a skinhead Christian identity racist church that was a sort of offshoot of this kind of white supremacist thinking. And so these things have existed in that area. The truth is they exist everywhere, though. I mean, there are more skinheads in the city of Portland than almost anywhere. There also happen to be, more of everything in bigger cities. So, but I think living in a place like Spokane, also underscores the fact that we are in a time now when there's this great urban-rural divide. And Spokane is a very blue city, with a progressive city council. Just yesterday, there were protests and tear gassing for people who tried to stop a migrant bus from pulling away. So you have that in the center, but surrounding it is what we call the red now. This much more conservative and even MAGA kind of community. And then Idaho is one of those states whose governance has kind of really moved over in that way. And so, yeah, I do think it's very specific to the world I live in, but I think it also is that way in blue cities everywhere. You go to Little Rock, Arkansas, and you'll find this sort of more progressive center of the city surrounded by suburbs and rural parts. And so I think some of us are living in more of a borderland than if you lived in Brooklyn, if you lived in Westwood, wherever, where we do come across more of that, of the sort of blending of those two things. And I think another place that I have hope is in those areas. I think those people do come together to support, the things that mean that we all agree mean something. And that used to be school bonds, used to be things like, every school bond passed, every library bond passed, you support the roads, you do those things that make the community better. And I do think that's the path back, is in these little local areas where blue and red, as we unfortunately call it, have to come together to make things work. And I see that happen, I have people on the other end of the political spectrum that I can agree with on certain things, like if the Seattle Supersonics get a basketball team back, that will unite us in a way that will cross political borders. But yeah, I do think there is something about the place that I live. And every other book I sort of venture out. The Zero was about New York. Come back and write The Financial Lives of the Poets, which is set in Spokane. Beautiful Ruins is set in Italy and Hollywood and other places. Come back and write We Live in Water, which was set in Spokane. And then my last book was The Angel of Rome, which is a book of short stories, also kind of all over the place. And so I really did want to come back to my home. It's my favorite thing about being a fiction writer, is going away, immersing myself in some place, and then coming home and writing about the place that I know best, the place that is so deeply ingrained in me that the air and the water just feel like they feel natural to me, and like the place that I can describe the best and the easiest.
Yeah, listening to you talk, it was calling to mind for me, like when you were talking about the ways in which we like bridge divides, and like, your experience on the ground in Spokane, and, the library bonds always passing. It was calling to mind for me an essay that I read, and I forget where and by whom. It's just, I remember it because it was written by, I believe, a Canadian who was saying, like, look, the civic unity of America is fraying in ways that it wouldn't in Canada for these reasons. And he cited a national healthcare system, great public schools, and good worker protections and union jobs, so people can form a living, can have a living wage. And he's like, when you're in Canada and you're checking out at the grocery store, that the person checking you out has healthcare, and they get paid a living wage, and their kids probably go to school with your kids. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that kind of made some sense to me. I was like, we have sort of lost that. I think we used to have it to a greater degree than we do now.
Yeah, there's that old book, Bowling Alone, that talks about how we, the social clubs and all that fell apart. And one of the places that it still exists is in churches, and and yet we also are a much more secular country than ever too. And so, yeah, those pathways back, eventually, and it's, as I said, it's the most disappointing to me that these battles have reached schools, where don't teach my kid about sex, don't, and libraries, where there actually was a county sheriff near Spokane who would just go to the library and look for, I don't know, books about gay penguins that he could take out of the library, and it's such a misuse of time and energy. And, I do think we want things to run well, and we want, we don't want public health to fall as far behind as it might, and so I do think this overreach swings back at some point over those things that enrich our lives and make them better. Boy, would everyone having healthcare be an easier place to start? Oh my gosh, yes, But I do think there are still things that tie us together in ways that I hope can bear the strain of these years, because it'll be a strain. It's a strain already, It's but I as I said, I'm hopeful that the underpinnings are stronger than they look from, maybe from the vantage of my smartphone screen right now.
So I think the last time we talked, which was many years ago, you were celebrating the publication of Beautiful Ruins. Would you call that your breakout book? That was a big book.
It's so funny. Some people ask me that, and when you're inside a career, you don't really feel that. I don't feel that that differently about that book as I do any other. I mean, let's see, 3 books before that, I had won an Edgar Award, and that could have been my breakout. And the next book was a National Book Award finalist, and that might have been my breakout. And the next book was, sold really well. And, my very first book was made into a mini series. Maybe that was my breakout. Every time I would hear that phrase, I would think back to high school and think that I was going to get a rash of zits on my face, Jess Walter has broke out, and so I'm aware of how sales affect this stuff, and how reviews affect this stuff, and how attention affects this stuff. But I try never to let it be to really take any of it too seriously. And I remember I was at we had a little book event, and they announced, and it was in New York, and I don't know that many people in New York, so I think I invited my nephew, or I didn't at the time, and they announced Beautiful Ruins has made the New York Times bestseller list, and I looked at the people who work with me in publishing, and I realized how important it was to them. Not that many, especially literary novels, make that list. And I felt so moved for my editor, who'd been with me for 5 books at the time, because the trust he'd had in me had been. And so when things like that happen, I tend to take more joy out of the fact that it's good for my agent and for my editor. For me, the thing I love is just finishing a story that feels great to me. And so right now, the book I'm really proud of this novel, but I love writing short stories so much. And so, I'll get $150 check for a short story, and it just fills me with joy, because that was my original love, and I'll be at a reading and someone will say, "Oh my gosh, I loved this story in the Angel of Rome." And in that moment we connect in this way. And the same thing happens over novels, but it almost feels to me like I'm a parent who thinks that kid gets too much attention. I love hearing from readers who found a short story of mine in a random literary magazine and want to talk about it.
Do you feel like you got your start as a writer of short stories? Is that right? Like, is that where you began?
Well, sort of. I mean, I did write a very misguided novel in my early 20s about a kid who grows up in Spokane, Washington. Go figure. And then he and his buddies commit all these pranks, and then he goes to Columbia, where he meets a group of writers and sits on the steps of the Low Library in New York. And I had never done any of that. I mean, I had never even been east of Wyoming at that point. So it was just sort of fantasy fiction, I guess. But after that, I started writing short stories to train myself. I was working as a journalist, and I had interviewed Kurt Vonnegut, and he had talked about writing short stories as a way to capture his voice. So I wrote short stories for 7 years, and I sent them out to journals, and I didn't get a single one published. I didn't have an agent. I was just coming in over the slush pile. And after 7 years, I sent one into a contest in Story magazine, the old Story magazine. And they had 7,000 entries, and I finished in 25th place, and I got a check for $25. And I remember thinking, well, now I'm a professional. And, and so that path to being a writer, short stories became for me this, and it was interesting. I published novels before I could really break through the short story market, because you're sending to the New Yorker, and it's like, there's no agent. There's just some guy from Spokane, Washington, you're hoping to get in, and so I love that. I love that path that I took to getting stories published, and I love when I finish one. I love what Tobias Wolff said about short stories, that you can approach perfection in them. Every novel is a mess. Every novel is almost defined by what it isn't, what it fails at, but a short story, we can all close our eyes and almost see a platonic ideal of a short story that we loved, that does the very thing it sets out to, partly because its scope is so much smaller. And so, I still love when I get to write a short story and sell them. And 2 of the last 4 books have been story collections, because I finally got to a point where, publishers would indulge that love for me.
I want to say, when you said you interviewed Kurt Vonnegut, I got like a flash that maybe we had talked about that the first time you were on the show.
We probably did. It's a story I tell quite often, because I posed as a writer from Esquire magazine as a 21-year-old or 20-year-old to get into interviewers. So
that's right. That's right. So, and where were you again? Like, where did this interview
Spokane.
take place?
I was working for my hometown newspaper. But I would, Ken Kesey came to Spokane, and I would write them and say, I'm writing for Inland Northwest Living magazine. I would, writing for, I was a college student at the time. I'm writing for Campus magazine. Can I interview so-and-so, and I didn't think they would let me interview Vonnegut, unless I really upped the ante a little bit. So, and at one point I asked, and I would sit there and ask my question in my faltering voice. Mr. Vonnegut, if you were going to give advice to a young writer, and he said, "Can I ask you a question? How old are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm 20." And he said, "And you're writing for Esquire?" And I said, "Well, they haven't accepted the piece yet, you know." And so he was very kind, though, but I remember him talking about developing his voice as a short story writer. And after that first kind of, you know, juvenile attempt at writing fiction and without an MFA, you know, being sort of a self-taught autodidact, reading just as passionately as I could. I had friends in MFA programs and people who taught in them, and I would get their syllabus and their reading list, and I would just, you know, I was going to follow along from home, you know, and it was a great way, that, and then journalism, where you're writing all the time, you know, you're getting your chops. I used to compare it to being like a piano player in a dive bar with a piano, you know, that's out of tune, but you play all the time. And so that combination of journalism and then, you know, sort of studying like studying writing for 7-10 years before having really any success, but following it in a I won't say it was monastic in any way, but it was very much kind of quiet to myself desire. And it's like, if I can just publish one short story. Okay. If I can just publish one novel. Okay. If I can just do this. And so when you talk about breakout, it almost sounds as if you've just thrown yourself through a curtain and all of a sudden I'm here, world. And my path wasn't that way. It was tiny step after tiny step. And I love each of those tiny steps. I still love getting a journal and just putting it on the bookshelf. And when I have a tradition, when a book comes, I just slide it on the bookshelf right past Vonnegut, you know, in my own personal bookshelf, because W comes right after V. And I guess Hugh Walpole or someone would sneak in there, but I don't have it in his books. So.
Well, I spent part of my childhood in Indiana, so Vonnegut.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, he grew up just down the road from where I lived, and
yeah, I've done events at the Vonnegut Center in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I've been. I went to it
Great
when
neighborhood.
I was back for my niece's high school graduation, and my family humored me. I was like, we just got to go here.
Yeah.
Had to pay homage. But I have to say, more than once over these past few years, I've found myself wondering what Kurt would have to say. I don't think he'd be surprised at all about the mess that we're in now.
I mean, there's almost, he was such an epigrammatic writer. There's almost a quote that you can apply to every day. I think there's a Vonnegut calendar probably there where you could tear it off and it would talk about, you know, tyranny and about, you know, idiocy and, you know, that his America is a public library, you know, but, you know, he also said, just be kind to one another, God damn it. You know, that's a pretty straightforward, simple philosophy that I think, you know, watching people dragged out of immigration hearings and thrown onto buses, I think we could all find some value in.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. I congratulate you on the publication of So Far Gone. I'm very happy that we are featuring it in the book club this month. And
I'm in the book club. I'm so pleased. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And I always end by asking my guests what they're working on. I think you said you're working on a short story collection. Like that's the next thing in the pipeline, or no?
No. The last book before this was a story collection. I am working on another novel, and it was the mothership bigger novel I've been working on for quite a while, and it's about a love triangle between two writers and a basketball player. So I'm bringing my loves together, writing and basketball in these three people whose I think their ambition is really the most threatening thing, not the other person in the love triangle.
I'm a Pacers fan, so don't even get me started on
Pacers.
Basketball.
I mean, they're playing the team that got stolen from Seattle. As much as I actually like some of those players on Oklahoma City, but I'm rooting so hard for the Pacers. Yeah, Halliburton has been amazing.
Fun team to watch. Both teams are actually fun, and I don't know, but like my entire life right now seems to be revolving around the NBA Finals. And if they pull, they've got to win it. I'm like, but it's excruciating. I don't know if they will.
I've somehow scheduled a book tour that causes me to miss every. It's torture. I almost I don't know what I was thinking, but tonight is when we're recording this. I'm not sure when it'll run, but tonight is Game 4, and it starts at 5:30, I believe, and my reading's at 7. So I will be I'll be missing the second half. Hopefully, the Pacers are up by 35 by then.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Well, Jess, I'll let you get back to book tour. Thank you again, and I wish you well.
Thanks, Brad.
Okay, there we go. That was my conversation with Jess Walter. His new novel is called So Far Gone. It's available now from Harper Books. It's the official June pick of the book club, and it's really good. You should read it. It's available. It's out there. Get your hands on it. Again, it's called So Far Gone. You can find Jess Walter on the internet at jesswalter.com. Follow him on social media. I believe he's on Blue Sky and Instagram. And one more time, the book is So Far Gone. Don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram. Sign up for my newsletter over at bradlisti.substack.com. If you are a devoted regular listener of this program and you love this show and you're just like, oh, I can't wait for a new episode, I hope you'll join the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this program going into the future. If you want to join my book club or get an Otherppl t-shirt or a sweatshirt, you can do all of the above at otherppl.com. If you want to join the waitlist for How to Write a Novel, the debut course from my new company, Deep Dive, which will be launching soon, you can join the waitlist over at www.deepdive.audio. Follow Deep Dive on Blue Sky and Instagram. If you have 2 minutes and you want to do me a quick favor, please give this show a rating wherever you listen. Rate it, review it. It helps the show in the algorithm, and it helps it find new listeners. All right, so coming up on Thursday, there should be a new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, the weekly pop culture assessment from the Otherppl Show. I will be joined, as always, by my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez, and we'll be assessing pop culture. We'll be excavating what's left of culture. It's a hangout show. It's meant to be informal and relaxing, ? I don't know what it is. It's just Mira and me talking. That's it. Mira and I talking. Mira talking to me. I talking to Mira. You know what I mean. Brad and Mira for the Culture on Thursday. All right?